Working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour Walgreens wasn't exactly thrilling. The store was always eerily quiet during the late hours, with only a handful of customers wandering in every now and then. Most of my shifts were spent alone, accompanied only by the dim hum of the fluorescent lights. It was monotonous, repetitive, but I didn't mind. Or at least that's what I thought. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when everything changed. The night had been slow, just a few regulars picking up their usual snacks or prescriptions. I was in the back sorting through inventory when I heard the familiar chime of the front door. That sound always felt a bit unsettling at night, like the store's quiet was being disrupted by an unseen force. I walked back to the counter and saw him, a man I'd never seen before. He had short, messy blonde hair and wore a plain blue shirt with jeans. At first glance, he didn't seem dangerous. In fact, he looked like any other late-night shopper. But something about his behavior felt off. He was moving quickly, glancing at me before disappearing behind one of the aisles. A sense of unease settled in my chest. His hurried movements and nervous glances seemed like more than just the actions of a tired man shopping at 2 a.m. Still, I tried to dismiss it as paranoia. But then he appeared again. This time his eyes darted toward me before he vanished behind another set of shelves. My apprehension grew. He repeated this strange pattern a few more times, emerging, glancing, disappearing. It was unsettling. I started to wonder, was he trying to shoplift? Was he searching for something specific? Or was he scoping the place out? None of it added up. There wasn't anything in this store that would justify such odd behavior. Yet, the way he moved, so quick and deliberate, sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I couldn't stop watching him, my curiosity getting the better of me. What was he doing? Why did he keep glancing at me? Then he vanished again. Nearly 30 minutes had passed since I'd last seen him. He hadn't left. I would have heard the door chime. I had to know where he'd gone. My heart raced as I decided to search the store. Something deep down told me I wouldn't like what I'd find. I walked the aisles, checking every corner, calling out a few times. No response. When I reached the back of the store, I heard it. Footsteps. He was moving toward the front. I hesitated for a moment before adrenaline surged through me. I headed toward the front, peeking around the corner. There he was, crouched behind the counter, my breath caught in my throat. He was fiddling with the cash register, his hands working quickly, desperately. That's when it hit me. I'd forgotten to lock the register. I hadn't used it all night. If he got it open, he could clean it out. Panic coursed through me. I had to act fast. I stepped forward, and our eyes locked. He froze, but instead of running, he did something that chilled me to my core. He vaulted over the counter and came straight at me. I barely had time to react. My body went into fight or flight mode. I turned and bolted toward the back room, my heart pounding, so hard it felt like it might burst. I made it just in time, slamming the door shut and locking it behind me. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation, every word a struggle against the panic threatening to consume me. In the silence of the back room, I waited. Minutes felt like hours. Every creak of the floor outside sent my stomach plummeting. I was sure he was out there waiting. He had to know I had nowhere else to go. But then, the silence grew. Unnatural. Too quiet. I could hear nothing but my own breathing and the thundering of my heartbeat. Was he still there? Had he given up? When the police arrived, I unlocked the door. They swept through the store, but he was gone. The security footage showed everything. His face, his frantic attempts to break into the register, but one frame sent chills down my spine. He paused, staring directly at the security camera, as if he knew exactly where it was. "He's not just a random thief," one officer said, shaking his head. "This guy's too methodical." The police reviewed the footage and tracked him down within hours. They told me he had a history of stalking, watching his targets for days before making a move. When they arrested him, he didn't resist. Even after his capture, I couldn't stop thinking about that look he gave the camera. Had he been planning this for longer than I realized? Was he waiting for the perfect moment to strike? The thought made my skin crawl. The next few days passed in a blur. The police found a list of other stores he'd been frequenting, all late at night, always watching, always waiting. But the unsettling feeling didn't go away. What if I hadn't locked the door in time? Could he have been planning something worse? Even now, I still feel like I'm being watched. The officers assured me I'm safe, but part of me doesn't believe them. They caught him, but those eyes, his wide, knowing eyes, haunt me. It's as if he was trying to communicate something, even without words. It's been a while since that night. I still work the overnight shift, but now I always double-check the locks. I've learned that when the store is silent, danger feels closer. Because sometimes silence isn't peaceful, it's just the calm before the storm. It all began when I realized I needed a passport. I was 18 and my family had planned a big trip abroad. Until then, I'd never thought about getting a passport. It simply wasn't something I'd ever needed. But this time, I had no choice. I walked into the local Walgreens, a place I often visited for small errands like grabbing shampoo or snacks. The photo department was tucked into a corner, its soft fluorescent lights giving the area a slightly colder vibe. I had barely noticed it before, but today I had a mission. The man behind the counter greeted me with a polite smile. He seemed friendly enough, maybe in his late 20s, just a little older than me. He snapped my photo quickly and printed it out without much fuss. "Here you go, miss," he said, handing me the small print. "All set." The whole process was typical, nothing remarkable. Within 10 minutes, the photo was ready, and I was out of the store before I had much time to think about it. Surprisingly, the photo turned out better than I expected. I wasn't smiling too widely, and the lighting actually made me look decent. I felt relieved. It was done. I got my passport shortly after and packed my bags for the trip. The days flew by in a blur of new places, incredible food, and exciting experiences. I felt on top of the world. The plane ride home, however, felt long. I had time to reflect on everything, and as we touched down, I couldn't wait to share my memories with friends. But when I turned on my phone, there was a message waiting for me from a friend, Jake. He'd sent a link to an Instagram profile. The account name was mine. My first thought was, what's going on? The profile picture was the passport photo I'd taken at Walgreens. How was this even possible? Heart racing, I clicked the link. The account was private, so I couldn't see its posts. But what shocked me most were the followers, over 10,000 of them. I scrolled further. The account was following even more people, but what unsettled me most was that it had been posting regularly. It felt wrong. My own face was being used without my consent. Jake had messaged the account, a simple "hi," but hadn't accepted its follow request. I decided to message it too. "Hi, who are you?" I typed, my nerves on edge. Within minutes, the message was marked as read, but no reply came. My mind was spinning. How had someone gotten hold of my passport photo? I hadn't posted it anywhere, and I hadn't shared it online. The only person who'd seen it was the man at Walgreens. Could he have taken it without my knowledge? It didn't seem likely, yet nothing about this situation made sense. The more I thought about it, the more anxious I became. I had to figure out who was behind this. The next day, I went back to Walgreens. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I needed to ask about the man who'd taken my photo. When I arrived, a woman was working behind the counter. She greeted me, but I noticed a hint of wariness in her expression. "I need to ask about the guy who used to work here," I said. "The one who took my passport picture." Her expression changed, and she glanced around nervously as though checking if anyone was listening. "You mean Brad?" she asked hesitantly. Brad, that was his name. The man who'd taken my photo. "Yeah," I said. She lowered her voice. "He's not here anymore. He got fired a while ago. He was, a bit off. Some customers complained, and we had to let him go." A chill ran through me. It had to be him. I had no proof, but in my gut, I knew Brad had taken my picture and somehow used it for that Instagram account. But why? What was his motive? I left the store, my mind spinning. The fear and confusion were overwhelming. I immediately reported the account and asked my friends to do the same. The next few days were filled with unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something or someone was lurking out there waiting for me. The Instagram account didn't disappear immediately, and each time I checked it, my heart raced. I kept wondering, who else had been contacted? Was anyone else being followed by this mysterious profile? Was Brad, or whoever was behind it, tracking my every move? What was their end goal? Eventually, after a week of trying to get answers, the account was either taken down or deleted. It was gone. But even now, years later, the memory lingers. I never found out who was behind it or why they chose me, but I know I'll never forget that feeling of violation. Looking back, I realize how vulnerable I was in that moment. I had trusted the process, never thinking twice about handing over my passport photo. But in the end, it wasn't just a picture. It was an entry point into my life, something someone could exploit for their own reasons. I never went back to that Walgreens. And every time I look at my passport, I can't help but wonder if there's still someone out there with my face. Maybe it was Brad. Maybe it wasn't. But I'll never know for sure. The account was gone, or so I told myself every time I looked at my phone and checked for updates. The fear and confusion that had consumed me for weeks began to fade, replaced by a strange sense of relief. It was over, or so I thought. Months passed. I moved on with my life, school, friends, and the usual routine. But the feeling of being watched lingered, a faint echo in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the nagging thought that the situation wasn't truly resolved. There were too many unanswered questions, too many things I'd never understand. One day, as I was scrolling through social media, a message popped up on Instagram and my heart stopped. The sender's name? Brad. My palms went clammy as I clicked on the message without thinking. It was simple, as it had always been. Hi. My heart pounded in my chest. How had he found me again? Had he created another account? Or was it just a random person using the same name? Was I being paranoid, or was it actually him? My instincts screamed at me to block the account, but curiosity kept me frozen. What did he want? Before I could respond, another notification appeared. A follow request from an account with no profile picture, just a blank space. The username was an odd jumble of letters and numbers, but the description made my breath catch. It was my passport photo. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. It was Brad, or someone using the same tactics. I had learned the hard way that the digital world was filled with people who could hide behind screens, watching without being seen. And now, I felt like I was right back where it all began. I blocked the account immediately and reported it again. But this time, I didn't feel the same relief when it disappeared. The fear that had initially gripped me crept back in, but it was different now. I wasn't the naive girl who didn't understand how easily her information could be stolen and misused. I decided to take extra precautions. I locked down my social media accounts, updated my privacy settings, and even considered consulting a lawyer. But no matter what steps I took, I couldn't shake the lingering feeling that someone, somewhere, still had access to a piece of me, something I couldn't control. A few weeks later, I ran into an old friend at a cafe. As we caught up, he mentioned a strange encounter he'd had with someone who seemed to know too much about him, as if they'd been watching his every move. At first, I brushed it off, but then, without thinking, I asked, did they have a blank profile? And did they send a message saying just hi? His face turned pale and he nodded. A sickening realization washed over me. It wasn't just me. Brad, or whoever it was, had moved on to other targets. The chilling thought that I wasn't the only one being watched sent shivers down my spine. The truth is, I'll never fully know what Brad's intentions were. Was he trying to steal my identity, or was it just some twisted game? I couldn't say. But the fear of having my identity out there, exposed and vulnerable, lingered like a shadow. I've learned that some stories don't have neat endings. Some people slip through the cracks and never truly disappear. Even though that Instagram account is gone, the face in the picture, the one that started it all, still haunts me. Because it wasn't just a passport photo. It was a part of me, out there for anyone to take, and now it feels like it always will be. It was one of those typical afternoons when I ended up going to Walgreens with my mom. I must have been around 9 years old, and as usual, I had tagged along because she needed to pick up a few things for the house. I didn't mind much. She often brought me on these quick errands. The store wasn't far, and we were usually in and out pretty fast. Walgreens wasn't the largest place, but it was always buzzing with activity. The steady hum of shopping carts, low conversations, and the familiar beep of the registers as customers checked out. By then I was pretty used to it. I remember my mom heading straight to the pharmacy section, holding a small shopping list in her hand. I didn't pay much attention to what she was doing. My focus had already wandered to the candy aisle, which, for me, was always the highlight of the trip. Even though I didn't have any money, I liked looking at the colorful packages and imagining which ones I'd choose if I could. After a few minutes, I wandered off. I could hear my mom faintly calling after me, "Stay close, honey," but I didn't think much of it. I was used to having a little freedom for a few minutes. The candy aisle felt like heaven. Rows and rows of sweets, chips, and chocolate bars lined up perfectly. I picked up a pack of gummies and studied it, imagining what it would feel like to buy all of them. That's when I noticed her. She was a woman, probably in her early 30s. I can't say for sure now, but that's how she seemed to me at the time. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and she was dressed casually. Nothing particularly memorable. At first, I didn't think much of her. "Hey there," she said, her voice soft but friendly. "Do you like those?" She pointed to the gummies in my hand. I wasn't used to strangers talking to me, but something about her smile made me feel at ease. "Yeah, I love these," I replied, holding up the pack. "They're great, huh?" she said. "I used to love those when I was your age." I nodded, not entirely sure why she was talking to me, but it seemed harmless enough. "What's your name?" "My name's Jessica," she said, her smile still warm. "What about you?" I told her my name, and for some reason she seemed really interested in it. "That's such a nice name," she said, like she truly meant it. Then, as if it were no big deal, she asked, "Where's your mom?" That's when something felt a little off. It wasn't like she was asking to help me find her or anything. It just seemed like curiosity. I glanced around and said, "She's over there, looking for stuff." Jessica nodded as if that answer satisfied her. "You should tell your mom to get some chocolate bars, too. They're way better than gummies," she said casually. I just nodded again, unsure of how to respond. My mom had always warned me not to talk to strangers, and now I was starting to feel a little uneasy. But Jessica didn't seem threatening, just overly chatty. It wasn't until she started asking more personal questions that I began to feel uneasy. "Do you live nearby?" she asked, tilting her head like she was genuinely curious. Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just a few blocks away." Jessica's smile lingered a moment too long before she replied, "That's nice. You and your mom must come here a lot." I didn't know how to answer. It wasn't a strange question, but it felt like she was prying. A little too much. My eyes darted toward my mom, who was still a few aisles away. By now, I just wanted to go back to her. Then my mom called my name. "Danny, come on. We need to finish up." Feeling relieved, I turned to the woman and said, "I've got to go." Jessica didn't seem fazed. "All right, take care of yourself," she said with one last smile before walking away. Disappearing into another aisle, I watched her for a moment, but I didn't think much of it. I just wanted to find my mom and leave. We finished our shopping and headed to the checkout. As we were paying, I spotted Jessica again. She was standing at the far end of the store, staring directly at me. She wasn't pretending to browse the shelves anymore. Her eyes were locked on me like she was waiting for me to notice. There was something unsettling about the way she looked at me, but I didn't say anything to my mom. I didn't want to make a big deal out of nothing. Once we paid and left the store, I climbed into the back seat of the car while my mom loaded the groceries into the trunk. I sat there staring out the window, trying to shake off the strange feeling. That's when I saw her again. Jessica had just walked out of Walgreens, and her eyes immediately found our car. She wasn't looking at anyone else. It was like her attention was solely on us. She started walking to her car, moving slowly and deliberately, almost like she wanted to be seen. "Mom," I said quietly, "that lady is staring at us again." My mom was busy with the groceries and didn't hear me. I couldn't take my eyes off Jessica. She got into a car parked a little farther down the lot, and my heart started pounding. Was I imagining things, or was something wrong? As we pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced back through the rearview mirror. Jessica's car pulled out right behind us. My mom didn't notice, but my stomach tightened with unease. Jessica wasn't tailgating us, but she didn't stop following either, keeping a few cars between us at all times. I kept glancing from the rear view to the side mirror, hoping she'd turn off somewhere, but she didn't. "Mom," I said, trying to sound calm, "that lady is still behind us." "Who?" my mom asked, glancing in her mirror. She didn't seem concerned. "What lady?" I turned to look again. Jessica's car was still there, keeping her distance but never losing us. "She followed us out of Walgreens," I said. "It's probably just a coincidence," my mom replied dismissively. "Maybe she's heading in the same direction." But I wasn't convinced. Every turn we made, Jessica followed, always keeping close enough that I could see her. It felt deliberate, like she wanted us to know she was there. When we finally pulled into our neighborhood, I hoped she'd stop, but she didn't. Jessica's car drove slowly past our street. Her eyes locked on us as she disappeared around the corner. A wave of dread washed over me. Why had she followed us? That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I lay in bed, wondering if she'd come back or if she'd been watching us longer than I realized. The next day, I overheard my mom talking to a neighbor. Apparently, someone matching Jessica's description had been seen around the neighborhood, asking strange questions about families and where they lived before disappearing. It wasn't the first time someone had noticed her. I didn't know if it was the same woman, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was. I never saw her again after that day, but I still wonder, what did she want? Why was she so focused on us? To this day, I don't know if I was just a kid with an overactive imagination or if something much darker was going on. It was just another Friday night, but something about it felt different. I'd wrapped up work later than usual, and all I wanted was to grab some snacks and relax. The streets near my place, just outside Chicago, were unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes when everyone's inside winding down for the night. I didn't have any specific plans, but the craving for snacks was strong. A quick glance at my phone told me that Walgreens was open, just a 5-minute drive away. Perfect. When I pulled up outside the store, the warm glow of the fluorescent lights inside felt inviting. I parked, stepped out of my car, and walked in, grabbing a basket on the way. The aisles were mostly empty, save for a few late-night shoppers. Nothing unusual for this time of night. I headed straight for the snack aisle, picking up my go-to chips, a couple of drinks, and some candy. While scanning the shelves, I noticed 2 women nearby chatting quietly. I wasn't paying them much attention until one of them glanced my way and smiled. She was blonde, tall, with a friendly sparkle in her eyes. "Hey, excuse me," she called out. "Do you have a minute?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, sure. What's up?" The dark-haired woman next to her chimed in, glancing at her friend before speaking. "We're in a bit of a jam. We've been trying to get an Uber, but it's just not working. We really need to get home, and we're kind of stuck." Something about them felt off. Nothing obvious, just a subtle unease I couldn't place. Still, I shrugged it off. They seemed harmless enough. The blonde stepped closer. a hopeful smile on her face. "It's not far, just 5 minutes down the road. Would you mind giving us a ride?" I hesitated. Normally, the thought of giving two strangers a ride wouldn't even cross my mind. But there was something in their tone, maybe desperation or something else, that made me pause. Besides, they were attractive, and I didn't exactly have anything better to do. "All right, sure," I said, figuring it wouldn't hurt. "Where are we going?" "Just follow us, we'll direct you," the blonde replied with a smile. They led me out of the store and even offered to pay for my snacks as a thank you, which seemed like a nice gesture. We walked to my car and I glanced at them as they climbed into the back seat. I felt a slight pang of discomfort, but I brushed it off. Once we were all inside, I asked for the address, but they told me they'd guide me as we went. At first, the directions were simple: take the nearest highway and keep going straight. But as the minutes passed, I realized the destination wasn't as close as they'd claimed. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I noticed both women were glued to their phones, scrolling or texting, barely paying attention to the road. "So, how much further is it?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Not far," the dark-haired woman replied, barely lifting her eyes from her phone. "We'll tell you when to turn." Minutes stretched into what felt like miles. The more I drove, the more unfamiliar the area became. We were far from the city lights and usual traffic, heading down roads I'd never seen before. Unease gnawed at me, but I tried to brush it off. "Take the next exit," the blonde instructed. Without thinking, I complied. We turned off the highway onto a quieter road. It was darker here, with scattered streetlights barely illuminating the path ahead. Houses became fewer and farther between, their yards overgrown with weeds and shadowed by trees. The further we went, the more isolated everything felt. My gut twisted in warning, but I forced myself to ignore it. After all, they seemed harmless enough, didn't they? "Just a little further," the blonde assured me, her voice calm. One of them said, "We're almost there." We pulled onto a small winding driveway that led to a large dark house, mostly hidden by the surrounding trees. It looked abandoned, or at the very least, uninviting. My unease grew stronger, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I stopped, halfway up the driveway, just as they'd asked. The two women got out of the car. "Thanks again," the dark-haired one said with a smile. "Could you walk us to the door? It's just, we're not really comfortable walking alone in this neighborhood." I looked at them, confused. The house wasn't far, it was right there. Still, I agreed, figuring I was just overthinking things. "Sure," I said, stepping out of the car. We started walking toward the house, and that's when I saw him, a figure standing at the edge of the tree line. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me in the low light, but as I stared, I realized he was real. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, and staring directly at us. I froze. "Hey, there's someone standing over there," I said, pointing with a shaky voice. The women didn't seem to notice, or if they did, they didn't care. "Come on," the blonde one urged. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Something was very wrong. The man stepped out of the shadows, moving unnaturally fast. He was running toward us, too fast. "There's a guy coming after us," I shouted, panic bubbling in my chest. But the women didn't react. They just kept walking toward the house, as if nothing was happening. My heart pounded as I realized this wasn't normal. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. "Let's go!" I yelled, spinning around and running back to my car. I sprinted as fast as I could, the sound of footsteps thundering behind me. The man was close. Too close. I reached my car, fumbling with the door handle in my panic. Just as I slammed the door shut and locked it, the man reached me. He hit the window with both hands, his face inches from mine. His expression was wild, almost inhuman. I didn't think, I just acted. I started the engine, my foot slamming on the gas. The car jolted backward as I reversed out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I could still see him. He was running after me, his shadow growing smaller but never stopping. He pounded on the car, his fists like hammers against the metal. I swerved, desperate to get away. My mind raced. fear gripping me too tightly to think clearly. My heart felt like it was going to explode. Finally, I shifted into drive and sped off, not even daring to look back. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back on a familiar road where the city lights glimmered in the distance. Pulling over, I tried to catch my breath. My hands were trembling and my chest felt tight. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, struggling to get the words out. I gave them my location, using the map on my phone to guide me. It felt like hours before the police arrived. They asked questions, took my statement, and searched the area. But the women and the man were gone, vanished without a trace. All I could give them were vague descriptions. Nothing about them stood out enough to be helpful. The officers assured me they'd investigate, but deep down, I knew I'd never get answers. Who they were or why they'd set me up didn't matter anymore. That night I learned my lesson the hard way. I swore I'd never give anyone a ride again, especially not strangers. It was a typical Thursday night and I was working my shift at the Walgreens on 5th Street. The usual quiet had settled in, with the clock showing 9:45 p.m. The aisles were mostly empty, save for a few last-minute shoppers casually browsing. Just 15 minutes to closing, I thought, eager to finish. Almost done? I called to Alyssa, who was busy organizing stock behind the pharmacy counter. Just a couple more things, she replied, not even glancing up. I gave her a small nod and turned toward the front of the store. Noah, the other cashier, was slumped behind the register scrolling on his phone. He barely acknowledged passing customers, offering them a half-hearted hi without looking up. As I wiped the counter, my mind wandered to the thought of finally clocking out and heading home for some much-needed rest. Just then, the bell above the door chimed, signaling someone's entrance. A man walked in, looking to be in his late 30s. He wore an oversized gray hoodie and worn-out jeans, his eyes unfocused as if he were in a daze. I watched him for a moment. He moved slowly down the aisles, his hands brushing over the shelves, but he didn't pick anything up. Something about him seemed off. I glanced at Alyssa and whispered, "That guy's been wandering around. Does he seem odd to you?" She frowned slightly. "Yeah, it's like he's lost or something. Maybe he's just shopping late, but he's not actually buying anything." I nodded, unconvinced. My gut told me something wasn't right, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. The man eventually turned into the cleaning supplies aisle, and I went back to my tasks, though I couldn't stop glancing at him. He didn't seem dangerous, but his behavior was unsettling. A few minutes later, he came to the front. I was still wiping down the counter when he stopped in front of me without saying a word. Forcing a polite smile, I asked, "Can I help you find something?" He looked at me, his eyes still distant as if he hadn't really heard. After a moment, he gave a faint nod, though it didn't seem like he knew what he was agreeing to. He wandered toward the shelves, picked up a pack of gum, stared at it for a moment, and put it back. A creeping unease settled over me. His behavior wasn't normal. Was he just tired? Or was it something more? I kept my distance, unsure of what to do. After a few minutes of aimless wandering, he approached the counter again. This time he placed a pack of batteries in front of me without a word. His hands were trembling slightly, though I couldn't tell if it was nerves or something else. I scanned the item quickly and asked, "Is that all for tonight?" He nodded, and I totaled it up. He handed me a crumpled $5 bill, and I didn't think much of it, just another late-night shopper. "Thank you, have a good night," I said cheerfully. But instead of leaving, he just stood there staring at the counter. The silence grew uncomfortable. "Sir?" I asked, my voice slightly tense. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" He didn't respond. He just kept staring, lost in thought. I glanced at Alyssa, who was now watching him too. "Is he okay?" I whispered. She shrugged, her expression uneasy. "I don't know. He's acting really weird." The man's gaze finally shifted, and he looked up at me. His expression was distant, almost hollow. After what felt like forever, he spoke, his voice barely audible. "Do you lock the doors after I leave?" The question hit me hard. sending a chill down my spine. The way he asked, like it was the most important thing in the world, made my skin crawl. Yeah, I managed to say. We lock up after hours. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked slowly toward the door. His movements, deliberate and heavy. Slow and deliberate, the man approached the door but paused again just before stepping out. It felt like he was waiting for something or someone. He glanced back over his shoulder, his eyes locking with mine for a brief moment. Then, without a word, he stepped out into the night. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The air around me felt heavy, almost suffocating. Something about that man, his behavior, his presence, it just didn't sit right. As I turned back to finish closing up, my eyes caught something odd on the counter. A pack of gum. It hadn't been there when he paid. I leaned closer, realizing the wrapper had been torn open and a few pieces were missing. "Alyssa," I called out, my voice uneasy. "Did you see this?" She walked over, her brow furrowed. "No, that wasn't there before." "Are you sure?" I stared at it, my gut twisting. I was certain it hadn't been there earlier. The fact that it was open with pieces missing filled me with an inexplicable sense of dread. Before I could say anything else, Noah, still glued to his phone, muttered, "Did he leave anything else behind?" I picked up the crumpled $5 bill. The man had used to pay. That's when I noticed it. Dark stains smeared across the surface. My stomach sank as realization hit. It looked like blood. "Is that blood?" Alyssa asked, her voice trembling. I held the bill closer, feeling a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I glanced toward Noah, who finally looked up from his phone. His face turned pale. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice trailing off. "We need to call the cops," I said, urgency tightening my chest. Grabbing my phone, I was about to dial when it suddenly rang in my hand. The screen showed an unknown number. A chill ran down my spine as I answered. "Hello? This is Officer Grant with the police department," a firm voice said. "Am I speaking to the manager at Walgreens on 5th Street? I froze. "Yes, what's going on?" "We've received reports of a stabbing nearby. The suspect is described as a man in a gray hoodie. Can you confirm if someone matching that description was in your store tonight?" I exchanged a panicked look with Alyssa and Noah. "Yes," I replied. "He was here just a few minutes ago. He paid with a crumpled bill and there's blood on it." There was a pause on the other end. Then the officer's tone sharpened. "Lock your doors immediately. Stay inside and don't leave until officers arrive. We're on our way." The call ended, and I stood frozen for a moment before snapping into action. "Lock the doors," I ordered, my voice shaky. Alyssa and Noah moved quickly, securing the entrances and flipping off the lights. The store fell into an eerie silence, the kind that made every small sound feel amplified. Then, a loud bang shattered the stillness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes darted to the glass doors. There he was, the man. His face was pressed against the glass, his eyes wide and unblinking. He didn't move. He didn't speak. "Get away from the door." "Now," I whispered, my voice barely audible. We all backed away, fear etched into our faces. The man stood there for what felt like an eternity, before slowly turning and disappearing into the shadows. The police arrived moments later, searching the area thoroughly, but they found nothing, no sign of the man, no trace of what had happened. The next day, the department called with an update. The man hadn't been found, and while they couldn't directly link him to the stabbing, his blood-stained bill and unsettling behavior left us shaken to the core. I don't know what his intentions were or why he acted the way he did, but I'll never forget the way he looked at me, or the chilling question he asked before leaving. "Do you lock the doors after I leave? Walking into that store will never feel the same again."